Good afternoon and welcome to Drive Time. On today's programme,
households down 2% of income from Budget 26 despite a bumper €9 billion spend by government. Will get political reaction.
A ceasefire in Gaza, thousands of Palestinians return home. We'll assess the challenge ahead.
Teenage boys are using AI girlfriends to create an online porn partner.
Barry Lenihan gives us the latest from the presidential campaign trail.
High rates of depression and anxiety among doctors and nurses.
And why wearing an eye patch might be good for sports.
You're very welcome indeed to the programme. 51551 is the number for your text. Now, the ESRI says, after their analysis, says Budget 2026 will result in small income losses next year of household disposable income. Small maybe, you might say, but with costs really high still for stuff like food and rent and energy still really high. We'll put that to Fianna Fáil and Sinn Féin a little bit later on in the programme. Timmy Dooley and Rose Conway Walsh, get your views into us now at 51551. You can WhatsApp the programme as well, 0870 32 32 32. Now, let's start the programme this afternoon with the news that the Israeli military announced in a statement that a ceasefire agreement in Gaza went into effect this morning. As part of the ceasefire agreement, Israeli troops in Gaza have been moving to the agreed withdrawal line after Israel's cabinet approved the deal last night. Shortly before coming on air, I spoke with medical student and translator Sama Kudai, and we've spoken with Sama several times during the war, and I asked her first this afternoon how she's been since we last spoke.
First of all, thank you so much for having me. So I'm currently displaced in Al-Mawasi, which is an area near the coast and West Khan Younis city in the southern of Gaza Strip. And yeah, that's where I am now.
Do you have a plan now, because of the ceasefire, to go home?
No, I don't think that at this stage of ceasefire that we will be able to get back home or to the area where my home was, because it's now turned to a rubble. And so in this stage, no, we are not going to be able to return.
Do you have any idea as to when you could return home?
No, unless they publish the maps. I don't think so.
Okay. Do you still have family in Gaza, of course? I mean, how are they, do you know?
So since our last talk in July, things have been really changed. My family and I are safe now, but we have saved many hardships, including displacement and loss of our home. But things are getting better regarding the famine, and so yeah, it's only getting better, especially with the ceasefire now it's going on.
Are they hopeful that aid will start to flow very quickly now and plentifully into Gaza?
Yeah, especially with now ceasefire. I mean, I hope this ceasefire lasts and brings some real relief to the people of Gaza. I mean, while fighting has stopped for now, the damage is huge. So homes destroyed, hospital overwhelmed, and people displaced. But the ceasefire is an important first step.
Can you talk to me a little bit about the devastation in Gaza and what needs to be rebuilt? Not just hospitals or homes or infrastructure like roads and so on, Sama. I also mean the destruction to the people of Gaza, psychologically and physically. I mean, and I know it's an extremely difficult question, but what do you think needs to be done to rebuild in terms of physically and infrastructurally?
So, honestly, I'll tell you what I felt today when the ceasefire actually has begun. So, I honestly, I felt nothing, because the ceasefire brings some relief, but the situation on life here remains very difficult. So it's like a temporary pause and bombing rather than a true return to normal life. So what happened to the people here, the trauma they have faced, the things they have witnessed, the current displacement. Like, I mean, yeah, it's a ceasefire now, but people cannot return to destroyed homes. They're going to be still in the same situation, just the bombing had stopped. Mm-hmm. I'll tell you my personal experience. And the 2014 war. I was just a kid, and we lost our home in that war too. It took us a whole 2 years to rebuild it I mean, no one actually paid us to rebuild it. We did by ourselves. So it took us 2 years. The amount of destruction in the whole Gaza city and the whole Gaza Strip that time was not as this time. It's so much worse this time. So I think it's going to be taking longer and much time, unless the international community and other countries shows much help for Gaza.
Okay, and some countries are pledging help monetarily and otherwise, but let's see what happens. And I know you personally, you were training to be a doctor, of course. Do you think you can... Yes. I mean, that's been paused, Sama, hasn't it? I mean, can that be restarted, do you think, now?
So at the beginning of this genocide, I was a second-year medical student. And due to when the genocide had actually started, my studies had been interrupted multiple times to the point where I'm now a full academic year behind my colleagues. However, a doctor actually helped me to secure a spot at a Canadian university a while ago, but I've been stuck in Gaza for a while, so I couldn't actually leave to start training and learning.
And I know you were helping doctors, Irish doctors as well, during this conflict. And you saw really brutal, traumatic injuries to people, didn't you?
Yeah, I was actually volunteering and working with an NGO in Nasser Medical Complex when I met and helped Irish doctors there. So I've witnessed so many injuries and mass casualties in the hospitals that I would never be able to forget. These times of injuries that came, it was the hardest thing to deal with that I've dealt with in my entire life.
Mm-hmm. Sometimes we've spoken with doctors who worked in Gaza, Sama, and they've talked about the injuries, sometimes the fatal injuries to children. It's going to take an awful lot of time, isn't it, for if you're one of the families affected by the brutality. I mean, can that be ever forgotten by any family, do you think, in Gaza now?
No one is going to be ever able to forget what happened in this genocide, because the amount of horror and chaos that have been happening here. You have seen beheaded. We have seen beheaded babies, beheaded children. We have seen extremely hard injuries. I mean, I've seen a girl that has been targeted with a helicopter missile, and she lost 3 of her limbs. I mean, she's just a kid, and that's one of 100 and 1,000 cases. So it's hard to accept for adults. It's hard to accept for someone to lose a limb. So how can actually children deal with that things?
Yeah.
Deal with such trauma?
Thank you very much indeed, Sama Kadei, medical student and translator. Thank you for joining us.
Thank you.
Nightmare journey on a train last weekend between Athlone and Dublin. Around 20 unaccompanied minors ran riot, created havoc and basically hijacked the train and did whatever they liked with impunity, leaving passengers feeling terrified and terrorised. These are the descriptions carried in the Westmeath Independent from an elderly man who has remained anonymous. The experience is horrendous. Well, we're going to speak to Barry Kenny from Iarnrow there in just a moment. But first, Geraldine Grennan has the story. She's a journalist with the Westmeath and Offaly Independent, and she joins us now. Geraldine, what happened on this train?
Hi Sarah, how are you? And thank you very much for having me on. We got an email from a man who had been a passenger on the train along with his wife, and they were in Athlone to visit his uncle. And he made such amazing allegations, we could hardly believe it. But the story he told us was he got on the train and up to 20 unaccompanied minors. He said the oldest was probably around 14 years of age. Got on the train and they were carrying cardboard boxes with ducks, chickens, cats, different types of small birds and animals, and they proceeded to torture the animals throughout the train journey. He said they were kicking them, pulling out the bird feathers, dragging the birds down the aisle, burning them with lighters, and the animals were in obvious distress, screaming in pain, and that everyone on the train was so terrorised and terrified.
Oh my God.
And then one female passenger tried to intervene, and they got around her, and they lit lighters and sprayed aerosols at her and other passengers, and they almost set one woman's hair on fire. He also said that some of the people were carrying wooden sticks, and that the atmosphere in carriage 3, or carriage C, where he was sitting with his wife, was threatening and intimidating throughout the whole journey.
Oh my goodness. And I know you saw an abusive incident on a train on another occasion, Geraldine. Can you tell us about that?
I actually did, Sarah. I was on the train in 2021 coming down from a music event in Dublin with my daughter, who was 22 at the time. And there was three young people got on the train. Well, 2 girls about maybe 13 and 14, and a little girl who was about 6. Now, as soon as they got on the train, the little girl climbed up on the luggage rack, and they were screaming, shouting. They just were out kind of to, I think, intimidate the other passengers. And one well-dressed and well-spoken black lady in her 40s turned to the group, and she said, "Mind the little one in case she falls." And the group, then the 3 people, including the small child, started intimidating this woman and subjected her to a sustained verbal and racial attack right throughout the whole journey. The little child, who was about 6 years of age, was pulling at her hair, pulling at the lady's hair, and she had a phone charger wrapped around her knuckles, and she kept kind of putting her knuckles towards the woman. And we were sitting, kind of across. It was terrifying. It really was terrifying. And nobody intervened. And I felt myself, we were a sitting duck on the train because there was nothing we could do.
Yeah.
And they got off in Port Arlington. Yeah.
Okay. Thank you for joining us with the update on the original story and indeed your own experience. That's Geraldine Grennan with the Westmeath and Offaly Independent. I mentioned with Barry Kenny from Éireann Road Éireann on the line as well. And the most recent incident, Barry, that Geraldine is describing there, really shocking. Have you had reports about it?
We have, I suppose, and quite a number after the event. We did on the evening itself, and very distressing for the customers that had to experience that, for which we obviously apologise. We had, as reported, a large number. We don't believe that number were directly involved in the incidents that occurred, but certainly there were a number of people that were causing distress through. I don't necessarily want to repeat the appalling details we've just heard.
What's the process for passengers? As Geraldine is describing, their passengers sitting there, they don't really know what to do. They're afraid to get involved, or if they do get involved, in a lot of instances, people can turn on them. So what's available in terms of help when passengers see something like this?
Well, on our intercity services, we do have our customer services officers on board. Obviously, their primary role is to look after everybody, but if there is an antisocial behaviour incident on board, it can be reported directly to them. Obviously, when you have multiple carriages in a train, and indeed different sections of the train, that person may not always be available to you. We also have at the door area of each of our carriages, there is a driver communications button that alerts the driver that there is an issue that would need to be raised, and when the train comes to a lower speed or indeed stops, the CCTV can be viewed internally. In our Dart and commuter area, we also have a text alert service to text the word train to 51444, followed by the details, and our central security centre.
Okay, but in terms of on board the train at the time, because I think in this instance the passenger said that an Irish Rail customer service representative did actually try to intervene, but the unaccompanied minors completely ignored him and continued running up and down the train using foul language and terrorising everyone. That's a quote. So there was someone there, but obviously that person is not trained in security. So do you need to have security on the trains at all times, do you think?
Well, certainly, we would liaise with, if you've got kind of patterns of behaviour. Obviously, this thankfully what was described is an isolated, but we would have security on certain trains. We would have work with Gardaí in terms of joint patrols. Just this week, major patrols with our Gardaí as well, and security at stations. We actually had our security teams at Tullamore board that particular train to try to endeavour to resolve that situation. And we are taking the information the customers have sent in to investigate this further. One thing as well is if people genuinely feel that there is a kind of a risk there, but there is also the option to contact RTÉ directly. And as I say, thankfully such instances are rare, but that is there for customers also.
All right, that is Barry Kenny from Erin Road there, and interested to hear from listeners in this 5151. If you've had your own experiences of antisocial behaviour on public transport, you can let us know.
You're welcome back. Wait till you hear this next story. A US university professor who published a book on the left-wing group Antifa was blocked as he tried to leave America in the face of threats against him. The New Jersey-based academic Mark Bray taught a course on anti-fascism, but after a White House event this week, hosted by Donald Trump, where the president promised very threatening, in his words, steps against Antifa activists, the historian felt America was unsafe for his family. He's now managed to leave the US, and he joined me just before coming on air from Spain. And I first asked him about his ordeal.
Right. So I'm in the history department. This semester, I'm teaching 3 courses. One is on anti-fascism, as you mentioned. Another is on terrorism, which, of course, is another topic that's pertinent to this conversation. And the third is a research seminar. Okay.
Another important element here is that a petition mark calling for your removal from the university was launched in the weeks following the assassination of Turning Point USA founder Charlie Kirk. And your home address was revealed on social media, and this immediately, for obvious reasons, prompted concerns in your household.
That's right, and that was amidst a wave of death threats, some of them quite graphic. So at that point, I knew that I didn't feel safe. I have 2 small children. I had to get out of my house, and I considered basically just, renting a place in the same town. Just so that my address wouldn't be public. But as time moved along, my level of comfort with the entire political situation deteriorated. And as concerned as I was when I left, I actually arrived in Spain this morning. Mm-hmm. I'm perhaps even more concerned about where it's heading.
And I'll ask you about that in just a second. But I mean, people, if you tell them how graphic some of the threats were, I mean, there was a threat, if I may ask, that vowed to kill you in front of your students.
Yes. Another one said that they were going to burn down my house and kill me as I ran out. So, it does not inspire confidence in the safety and security of my family.
Mm-hmm. So you decided to leave for those reasons, those concrete reasons. What happened when you tried to leave?
Well, on Wednesday, a very bizarre thing happened. And I have a lot of experience flying. I've traveled around different parts of the world. My family, we got through security. We were at the gate, right? We had our boarding passes, passports, everything in order. When the time that came up, basically there was some sort of error. They searched around and said at the very last second, someone somehow had effectively canceled our flight. That is just bizarre. And that was at the same time that the far-right figures who are harassing me online were meeting with Donald Trump at the White House. I just can't see it as a coincidence.
And what happened then? Who came up to you?
Well, we were just speaking with the United people, and the reservation was canceled. But they, of course, recognized that we should have a reservation. So basically, they started trying to work on it, but it was too little too late. The flight left, so they just booked us on one the next day. That ended up being a little bit of an ordeal as well. So yesterday when we left, we took an overnight flight and arrived this morning. Yesterday, in anticipation, we had a lot of support. I was in touch with the Rutgers Faculty Union. They contacted one of the U.S. senators from my district who was supportive, reached out to the airline. There was a lot of media attention on this. Mm-hmm. There was a lot of anticipation. When the time came, I was interrogated and searched by federal agents, well, as was my wife, for about an hour prior to boarding the plane. Ultimately, I've committed no crimes. They found nothing incriminated.
About what, though?
Well, you see, that's the thing is, right, they played it as we're looking out for your safety. We know there have been threats. We're concerned about you. But then slowly it segued into asking me questions like, well, I've heard things about where the money is supposedly going from your book. And that's when I said, I'm sorry, without a lawyer, I'm not continuing this conversation. And then they backed off and they said, OK, fine. Look through our bags. Unfortunately, look through my phone. I just was determined to get on that flight. We did, and we're here now.
Sorry, they searched your phone as well?
Yes. And so basically, I'm going to go get a new one later.
You might think there's a listening device there.
I don't know, but it does not make me feel good.
You mentioned it. Okay, so you arrive in Spain just this morning. You've basically fled the US. Do you have permission to stay in Spain do you have citizenship?
I do. I'm actually an Irish citizen. I'm a dual citizen of the US and Ireland.
I was thinking with Bray as a name, Mark, for sure.
Right. Yeah. My paternal grandfather was born in Limerick, but we could have gone to Ireland. Hey, maybe someday we'll end up in Ireland. But 2 years ago, we were in Spain on a research trip. We know the country very well. We want our kids to learn Spanish. And so my kids and I have EU citizenship, and my wife has Spanish residency through me.
Okay. So you're safe in Spain, and you're safe and legal in Spain. When you stay there, I mean, you mentioned you don't like where this is going politically in the US. Where is it going, do you think? Well,
what I tell my students when they ask me that is that, if we were imagining kind of a line on a graph, we'd say that where this line ends up, if this trajectory continues, is fascism. And I don't throw that word around lightly. I really don't. I'm a historian of this. But if you consult experts on fascism and ask them about what's going on in the US, the range of opinion is, on the one hand, this is fascism. On the other hand, this is awfully similar to fascism, but maybe not technically fascism. So that's where this is heading.
Yeah. Irish-American Rutgers University professor Mark Bray, thank you very much indeed for joining us.
Thanks to you.
Just a quick warning that our next conversation may contain some graphic details, so listener discretion is advised. At a conference on sexual violence this week, researchers warned that teenage boys are using AI to generate hyper-realistic girlfriends, avatars that can perform any sex act on command. What's more, they can be created using real photos of girls from social media. It's a disturbing development and one that's fueling concern about how tech is shaping harmful attitudes and behaviours. We're joined now by Owen Cleary, secondary school teacher and educational expert with the Sexual Exploitation Research and Policy Institute. And Owen, I know you've done a lot of research on the impact that porn is having on the young people of Ireland. So how exactly do these AI girlfriends work?
Hi Sarah, good to talk to you. This comes up, I'm researching the impact of porn on young people, like you said, and just in conversations with my transition year students last year, they alerted me to the issue of AI girlfriends, which I hadn't been aware of until then. So I just went online to see what they were talking about, and I suppose there's two different services available for anybody. There's no age verification required. One is a Nudify app, whereby you can upload any picture you have access to, whether it's on social media, whether it's of someone you know, whether it's of somebody you don't know, and it'll nudify it for you. Now, developments over the summer and the rapid rate that AI is developing means that you can now make videos, sexually explicit videos of any of those images that you upload. And then another service is this absolute explosion of AI girlfriends and AI boyfriends onto the scene who will perform sexually explicit, well, anything that you can think of, anything that you've seen or been exposed to on porn, you can now interact with an AI girlfriend or AI boyfriend and ask them to do whatever you want. So how it works generally on most of the sites or the apps is you've got a number of choices you can go on, and you can scroll through them like a dating app. And these AI boyfriends and girlfriends look real. You can't tell the difference between them and real people. And you can choose which personality and which body type to interact with, or you can generate your own. So you get to choose their ethnicity, their bust size, their bum size, their waist, their voice. The choice of voice that I was given most recently was between dominant, seductress, innocent and standard. And then you can choose the relationship that they're going to have with you. And the choices there that I was given was stepsister, stepmom, sex friend, girlfriend. But actually in the last couple of weeks, I've seen that they've added options to that, including teacher, mentor, schoolmate, and a whole host of other personalities.
So there are no age restrictions on many of these apps, and obviously if there's young boys or teenage boys using them, what do you think that'll do in terms of shaping boys' expectations around sex and consent and all of that?
Yeah, so I mean, it's important to say. Actually, it was a teenage girl who raised the issue with me,
right.
And I did check in with some teenage boys who had engaged with them as well. But the impact it's having is absolutely clear. So the program I run, it asks young people at a certain stage, after we've provided them with critical literacy skills, what they feel is expected of them because of their gender when it comes to sexually interacting with somebody. And the lists that they make are so sexually explicit and so pornified. And I never named that in the room, but I asked them, look, I say, your parents and your teachers are the ones that are meant to be teaching you about this stuff. Is that who's teaching you? And they say no. And I say, well, where is it coming from? And they say porn. And they're the ones that say porn. And then we get to have a big discussion about porn. But the problem is that so many of the things that they say name sexually explicit, sexually violent content. Like, I was with this group of particularly young transition year students recently who made a list, and they were so young that they were embarrassed to name the word penis, but they weren't embarrassed to name choking, slapping or pulling of hair. So those acts are becoming so normalised that they have no issue in naming those acts, but are really embarrassed about naming our own body parts. And that's really, really worrying, particularly because we know that 90% of mainstream porn available and being accessed by young people at the moment is misogynistic and violent in content, with 96% of that violence being perpetrated, that's physical violence being perpetrated against women.
And now you have the situation, as you say, Owen, with this app where you can take real people's faces and make them into effectively an online girlfriend, and then do with them online whatever you want, which in terms of blurring the line between reality and online is, you can see how problematic that could be. We must come back to it, but thank you very much for joining us to talk us through what's going on. That's Owen Cleary, who is an educational expert with Sexual Exploitation Research and Policy Institute.
Analysis by the ESRI, wait to hear this, has found that Budget 2026 will result in small income losses next year, averaging 2% of household disposable income, they say. The organisation said the withdrawal of temporary cost of living measures is responsible for much of this effect. For reaction now, I'm joined on the line by Rose Conway-Walsh, who's a Sinn Féin TD for Mayo and party spokesperson on enterprise, tourism and employment. I'm also joined by Minister of State and Fianna Fáil TD for Clare, Timmy Dooley. You're both very welcome to the programme. I might turn to you, Timmy Dooley, first of all, but confirmation now from the ESRI that some people will be less well off as a result of your budget. What do you say?
Yeah, but I think the most important aspect of this budget is that it has attempted to move away from those temporary measures which were a response to the spike in inflation, where we saw inflation running at 9 and 10%. And the state had to step in to protect, effectively, all members of society during those difficult times. Inflation has stabilised. It's back down now closer to 2%. And what we want to do is try and...
Costs are still very high. And by removing the ones off, you've hurt the families who are struggling. Well,
I accept costs are still high, but inflation is now trending around 2%, and it's really important that the decision that we take in a budget doesn't add to that inflation. The ESRI analysis confirms, as I understand it, that the lowest income households will be better off next year, marginally. But then when you look at the suite of measures and investments that's made, particularly in childcare, particularly in disabilities, which affects those households as well, putting money into social welfare, and then, the 500 permanent reduction in third level fees, that coupled with the support in childcare, the working family payment threshold being increased, providing back to school allowances for the 2 and 3 year olds, and increasing the child support.
Yeah.
€8 for those under 12 and €16 over 12, really is aimed at assisting those in the least well-off segment of society and those that have families.
OK, let me bring in Rose Conway-Walsh. Would you disagree?
Absolutely disagree. I mean, how do you protect people by making them worse off? That's a crazy statement to make. You could say, I'm not surprised what's come out with the ESRI report, because talking to people over the last number of days, I mean, workers know that they have been hammered in this budget, that they're actually worse off. Timmy mentions childcare. They promised a plan for $200 a month childcare within the first 100 days of government. There wasn't a mention of that in this budget. Then the once-off payments. Obviously, what they have done, they haven't given the energy credit. We showed them how they could do that to give €450 energy credit Not only that, then they've added carbon tax on again, which is another 157 million taken from people. So right across the board,
which is used for retrofitting and so on.
Penalised people. Well, it's used for retrofitting, but there's many other things that they could have done, Cormac, instead of that. And one of those was restricting the corporation tax relief for the bailed out banks. Now, that would have got them 289 million.
Yeah, okay.
And,
but let me bring it back to the fundamental point here, because the ESRI is saying that households will be less well off because you'll suffer losses to disposable income as a result of Budget 26. You say to me, Dooley, and I see the Taoiseach is challenging the ESRI on this as well. He's issued a statement. You say that low-income households are protected by the budget. But let me read you a line from the ESRI statement. They're saying there's a variation in how Budget 26 will affect households of different income levels, with slightly higher losses of 2.5% of household disposable income expected for low-income households.
Yeah, but that's when you attempt to do it on an average. But there's no such thing as an average family. They're all individuals and different depending on the makeup of the family, depending on the age profile of the children, depending on whether they're in national school or in secondary school or whether they're in college, depending on the working makeup of the family, whether one or both parents are on very low incomes and are depending on the minimum wage. So it's very hard to take this generalised approach and say...
hold on now. No matter how you slice or dice it, the line from the ESRI is that low-income households will suffer more.
That's attempting to do an average across the board. I'm suggesting to you that the analysis confirms that low-income households will be better off next year.
You're saying black is white.
I'm saying that's the analysis of the ESRI's report, and I'm saying to you that the measures that we have put in place are ensuring that those that are least well off are assisted most. That's a progressive approach to budgeting, and when you take that into account, I think you will accept and recognise that the challenges that are facing the state about looking to the threats from tariffs, whilst at the same time recognising that we had to take away those one-off measures.
Is that how, Rose Conway Walsh, is that how you see that line as well? There's a variation in how Budget 26 will affect households of different income levels, with slightly higher losses of 2.5% of household disposable income expected for low-income households.
Of course it'll affect everybody differently, but all they had to do was, we showed them in the alternative budget, they could have just copied and pasted it. They could have scrapped the USC for every worker under 40,000, earning under 40,000 euro. A very simple thing that could be done. What they did was they delivered one of the biggest tax packages ever. That was 2.5 billion in tax cuts over the year, and ordinary workers get nothing. And I think that is absolutely forgivable.
But Rose,
and I would say as well, I need to make an important point, Cormac. They haven't even shown in the budget what the cost of the existing levels of service are. I have never ever seen a budget to do that. So they don't even, to me, they absolutely don't know what they're doing, and they certainly don't give a damn about the households that I'm dealing with all day in Mayo.
Rose, with respect, the alternative budget from Sinn Féin was suggesting an additional somewhere between 13 and 16 billion investment into the economy, which would have risen inflation by between an additional, on top of the existing inflation, by addition of about between 2 and 4%. That would have targeted the least well off in society. That would have driven prices beyond their capacity, and it would have put the prudence that has been put in place over the last number of years in significant jeopardy at a time when there's a lot of uncertainty on the international markets, particularly with the tariffs being proposed from the United States.
Look at how can you raise inflation when you're with 300,000 people
by putting too much money into the economy?
Yes, of course. But when you have 300,000 people in arrears with their electricity bills, by helping them to pay off those bills and to help others not to go into arrears, that is not going to raise inflation.
And the Social Welfare Code is capable of assisting in that regard.
No, they're not assisting. How would they be assisting when there's 300,000 already in arrears? Timmy, you don't get the reality of what it's like for people on the ground. You could have made choices here. Another choice you could have made was extending the bank levy. Yes, you increased it to 200,000, but you could have done that to 400,000. There's many choices you could have made for people who are extremely well off in this country, including
trying to keep our banks.
You say you left people poor when you didn't have to. That's the allegation.
You have.
Let him answer that.
No, I don't accept that. I still stand over my point that those that are least well off have been protected, notwithstanding the difficulties and the conditions that we face in terms of where we're at now versus where we were a couple of years ago.
Well, I don't know, Timmy, because look at this line, another line from the ESRI report. This loss will be felt across the income distribution, with low-income households losing significantly more as a proportion of their disposable income compared to high-income households.
But when you consider all the additional supports that I've identified across the various different mix of families, the analysis supports that those that are least well off are most protected and will see a rise in.
So fundamentally then, are you saying the ESRI left those out?
No, I'm saying that the analysis that have been provided to me, I'm just sharing that with you, sets out very clearly that those that are least well off will be most protected and will be slightly better off.
Who
as
gave you that analysis then?
They're not,
through the Department of Finance.
So we have the Department of Finance saying one thing and the ESRI saying another. I wonder who's right.
And the Budgetary Oversight Office.
Our analysis of it is very clear, and as I said to you, when you take it across the income mix, those that are least well off will be most protected.
Maybe, Rose Conway-Walsh, maybe this is just simply a responsible, future-proofing, boring budget, doing stuff, investing in energy and infrastructure, which will not be seen in your pocket, but which is absolutely essential for the future growth of the country.
So what they're trying to do is protect people from themselves. That is absolutely crazy. This is not a responsible budget. It's not a responsible budget if you need a house, if you need a roof over your head, if you're somebody who's paying huge rent. Again, that wasn't increased the renter's credit. It is not. What the responsible thing to do, the first point of any government is to protect its citizens, and you haven't protected the most vulnerable people in society. And like, you look at people with disabilities, there wasn't a cost of disability payment either. People know that themselves. People who are really suffering the wrath of this government, they know what they are feeling. They know they cannot turn their heat on. They know that when they walk around the supermarket, they're looking to see if they can stretch it enough for the week to pay for their groceries. That is not right in 2025. When we have the biggest, we had a budget, a surplus of almost 10 billion. It is not right.
Timmy,
if the money wasn't there, I'd say something.
I would make 2 points to you on that, Rose. First of all, it was about stabilising the level of growth, the level of inflation, to ensure that those that were least well off didn't find themselves chasing ever increasing prices. There was, in addition to that, there was about 19 billion invested in infrastructure, or provided to invest in infrastructure next year. That's about ensuring that there's investment in water and sewerage services, investment in social and affordable housing, to ensure that those people that are most challenged in terms of providing for themselves accommodation are assisted in doing so. So it's a responsible budget across the piece.
The point Rose is making is that, and this was said by the Irish Wheelchair Association in their statement after the budget, that people on disability who are disabled will be €1,600 poorer.
Yeah, but the reality is that the other measures and supports there will support people with disabilities as well, and we're also trying to broaden the level of support.
Address that, though. Address that, because they've looked at all those other supports, and the IWA say if you're disabled in this country after your budget, you're €1,600 poor. Is that justifiable?
I haven't gone through those numbers in detail, so I can't respond directly to it. But if you take... No, well, I'd have to go through the figures in detail beforehand before I could disagree or agree with them.
You've heard the criticism from the IWA and the Disability Federation about Budget 26.
No, look, the budget will always be disagreed with by some. The effort has been made here to try, insofar as we possibly can, to have a responsible budget that doesn't increase inflation, that assists those that are least well off, and ensures that the appropriate amount of money is put into infrastructure so that we can deal with the deficit in housing, we can control the prices, and we can reduce the levels of rent in line with the growth that's in the economy.
Okay, look, we have to leave it there, unfortunately.
Look, haven't even changed the social and affordable housing targets to me.
We'll come back to this, I'm sure. Lots of text to 51551. Rose Conway-Walsh of Sinn Féin, thank you. And Minister of State and Fianna Fáil TD Timmy Dooley, thank you very much indeed.
A new World Health Organization survey has painted a stark picture today. 1 in 3 doctors and nurses in Europe report depression or anxiety, and 1 in 10 have had suicidal thoughts in the past 2 weeks. So what's the situation like in Ireland? Well, we're joined now by Professor Matthew Sadlier, Vice President of the Irish Medical Organisation. Matthew, thanks for joining us this evening. So I suppose firstly, were you surprised by these numbers?
No, not at all. I mean, this goes along the line of many of the surveys that we've run ourselves on issues like wellness, mental health and burnout among the medical staff within our hospital system. I mean, the demands being asked of doctors and nurses now in 2025 are at an unprecedented level, and yet we mostly work in health services that were designed around demands based in the 1950s. We have an inadequate number of beds, which puts a huge amount of pressure on staff, specifically in emergency departments where they are facing treating patients on corridors, where they can see patients having bad outcomes that they know they don't have to have if they had the adequate services there. We have problems where we have staff members who might be on a 1 in 5 rota, for example, who know that if they take any time off are actually putting their own colleagues at more stress by their colleagues having to increase their workload to compensate. So these are the problems that we see and get reported to ourselves every day of the week.
In this survey, 1 in 10 are reporting suicidal thoughts, which is obviously the very extreme end of mental health difficulties. I don't know, do you think that something like that could be replicated here? Is there any evidence of it?
Again, with some of these sociological surveys, you do have to take with a tiny pinch of salt. You know, there's a difference between answering a survey and having, a significant risk factor. But it is in line. I mean, the key thing here is the general trend. And there's undoubtedly that we would have a percentage of doctors, maybe not quite as high as that, but somewhere in that ballpark, I imagine, who would have had those fleeting thoughts at some point in time. Again, due to we still have junior doctors or NCHDs working 24-hour shifts. Now, when I graduated 26 or 7 years ago, a 24-hour shift, medicine was not as complicated. It wasn't as cognitively or physically demanding. Now, I mean, when I worked as a junior doctor, we would admit maybe 25 patients a night. Now, most of our hospitals are admitting 50, 60 and 70 patients a night. Our population has gone up by 50% in that last 25 years, but without the consequent increase in beds. And this is the chronic issue that's affecting our health service.
Yeah, and you can understand how exhaustion and burnout and stress and all of that can lead to mental health difficulties for doctors, which is really bad for doctors and nurses. But then it's also quite concerning from a patient perspective. Where does this leave the standard of care then?
Well, again, and we've talked about this for a long period of time, that the difficulty is, like, as I say, we have junior doctors doing 24-hour shifts, and there's very good evidence that once somebody works after about 10, maybe depending on the person, somewhere between 10 and 12 hours, their cognitive performance does drop. And that does lead to increased risk for patients. Like, there's no way an airline would allow a pilot to, fly a 17-hour flight all by themselves. But yet we have many hospitals out there where we have doctors basically doing that on incredibly long shifts, where they're driven into places of extreme anxiety, extreme fatigue and lethargy, and that can lead to difficulties. And then the doctor then starts to question themselves because they may have done something slightly wrong, or they may have had a near miss.
So I was going to ask you about that. So obviously, if you're in that situation where you're being put in these very difficult conditions, you're burnt out, you're stressed, maybe you don't have the supports that you need around you, or the system is not supporting you, and then you make a mistake, or you almost make a mistake. Do you think that then can lead to, obviously I presume it can lead to further mental health difficulties?
100% it can, and also can even a near miss, where you might have thought of doing something and you might chart the wrong drug and hang on a second, and you cross that out. But that will stick with you. That will stick with you, and you go home and you go, God, that was close. That was what happens if that happens again? And we also know that the courts are not particularly sympathetic to workload and stress, and most medical legal cases, it's an individual case is taken in isolation. It's not taken in the context that your department was full of X number of patients, that was the X number of patient that you'd seen that day. Yeah. So all of those do contribute.
Can I ask you then, finally, the government announced in the budget plans to hire 3,300 additional health staff next year. Do you think that will go some way to try and ease the pressure on frontline workers?
Well, if they can find them. I mean, that's ultimately the problem, is recruitment and retention. Like, there's thousands of jobs unfilled within our healthcare service. So the government providing extra funding for extra jobs is fantastic. But, you know, if we can't fill the jobs we have, what we need is a root and branch review of our acute hospital sector. And we also need a root and branch review of our, you know, medical, nursing and therapy professions to match what we need with the university courses to provide those staff and make sure that we have terms and conditions that will retain staff in Ireland, or look at reciprocal arrangements. We know that the majority of interns, medical interns, for example, in Ireland, go to Australia for 1 or 2 years. Why haven't we spoken to the Australian Medical Service and looked at doing a reciprocal arrangement? Because I'm sure there's plenty of doctors in Australia who would like a year or two in Ireland, where they could go to Paris for, you know, where they could travel Europe in a short distance. You know, these are the innovative solutions that we need.
All right, Matthew, thank you very much for joining us. That's Professor Matthew Sadlier, Vice President of the Irish Medical Organisation.
You're welcome.
Now, the presidential election campaign is entering a critical weekend as Fine Gael's hEadhra Humphreys seeks to reel in poll leader independent Catherine Connolly. The dust is finally settling on Fianna Fáil's withdrawal from the contest, putting a greater focus on the two remaining candidates. And our reporter Barry Lenihan joins us now. So, Barry, what's the latest?
Yeah, well, the battle between Catherine Connolly and hEadhra Humphreys intensifying ahead of the weekend, Sarah. And after yesterday's first one-on-one debate on this programme, Miss Connolly enjoys a 9 percentage point lead over Miss Humphreys in the most recent opinion poll. But when Fianna Fáil transfers were factored in, the contest too close to call. However, with those votes now not in play, the figures at the moment look rather difficult for Miss Humphreys. From a steady approach last week, now she must go on the attack. And so we've seen Fine Gael figures raise several questions around Catherine Connolly over the past 48 hours. The latest from TD Catherine Callahan, a former member of the Defence Forces, who has called on Miss Connolly to clarify Dáil remarks from last year that Ireland, quote, doesn't need an army. But there are also claims Fine Gael might be embarking on something more sinister after the party's former minister, Ivan Yates, said Fine Gael and Miss Humphreys' team should embark in a smear campaign against her. And these remarks were put to Catherine Connolly in Clonmel earlier.
I was actually absolutely shocked when it was brought to my attention yesterday, and to hear him actually saying it in the manner that he said it, kind of trivialising terrible language that was being used, smear the bejesus out of her, bring fear into the campaign. I think on the other hand he's done me a favour, he's done the people of Ireland a favour, and he's certainly done my team a favour in that he's absolutely exposed without hesitation what Fine Gael are up to. There's a lesson here for me, for my team and for the people of Ireland, that if you put your head above the parapet, this is what we will do to you. We will take you out. And this is really a very, very serious point in the campaign.
What did hEadhra Humphreys say in relation to all this, Barry?
And remember, the Labour leader Ivana Bacik yesterday accused Fine Gael of using increasingly desperate smear tactics, something which Miss Humphreys denied while canvassing in Wexford.
I'm not involved in any smear campaign. This to me is a fair campaign between myself and Catherine Connolly, and ultimately people will have to make up their own minds as to which of us will be the best president, the best 10th president of Ireland, and I'm hoping that they will choose me. So as far as I'm concerned, I don't really know what Yvonne is referring to, but there's no smear coming from me anyway, or indeed from my campaign team.
And was there any fallout from yesterday evening's debate, Barry?
Well, the Chief of Staff of the Defence Forces, Rossa Mulcahy, has been somewhat dragged into this electoral contest again. You'll remember a photo on social media of Jim Gavin and Mr Mulcahy had to be deleted last week. But last night in this studio, Catherine Connolly said no lesser person than the head of the Defence Forces said that if UNIFIL withdraws from the Lebanon, we'll have the same thing as what's going on in Palestine. But the Defence Forces has moved to clarify those remarks today. A spokesperson saying the Chief of Staff, Lieutenant General Rossa Mulcahy, did not make those comments. And now it's worth pointing out the former Chief of Staff, Mark Mellett, did make similar comments, but not the Chief of Staff himself.
OK, so where then stands the Catherine Connolly campaign at this very vital stage of the campaign?
She's still gaining momentum. Her campaign team say they've gained 5,000 new volunteers in the last 7 days. And those centrally involved in her campaign say the one versus one dynamic suits her. And after her viral video of keepy uppies, or solos as she called them, yesterday evening, Miss Connolly showed sporting skills of a different kind in the home of All-Ireland hurling champions Tipperary with a schlitter and a hurl. Such videos are magic for us, said one experienced TD in the Connolly camp. She's been in the headlines quite a bit, though, over the past 48 hours, but her supporters insist those stories aren't sticking, they aren't damaging. But Miss Connolly is likely to face renewed questions over her controversial trip to Syria in 2018, which was partly paid for with state monies. She said she never gave the impression she paid for that trip herself, even though at her campaign launch in July she said, "I funded that trip myself." And Fine Gael likely to raise this over the weekend as they seek to stall the Connolly momentum.
And what about the Fine Gael campaign then? How's that shaping up?
This time last week, Fine Gael felt in a strong position, but their campaign has been upended somewhat by Fianna Fáil's withdrawal. Now, those close to Heather Humphreys point to how her media performances are consistently improving and how she was spikier in this studio yesterday evening than before. But she still did land a killer blow on Miss Connolly, and that perhaps is a fear for some party members. However, her stronger performance yesterday will galvanise her supporters, and party grassroots say there are strong canvasses happening on the ground in several constituencies, and the party is united behind their candidate, giving their all. There are fears, though, from among some elected representatives and former ministers that I've spoken to, that the campaign is following, quote, more traditional lines than Miss Connolly, who is focusing on podcasts, social media, and that ultimately it might need more pizzazz if Miss Humphreys is to win.
And of course, the big question for Heather Humphreys, Barry, is whether she can now convince Fianna Fáil voters to back her.
You're taking a straw poll in several constituencies over the last day or so. The question on the lips of political observers everywhere: will the Fianna Fáil voters come out? What will they do? One Fine Gael observer told me how Miss Humphreys would concentrate on strong Fianna Fáil areas to convince them to vote for her. And there is hope within Fine Gael that once the anger around Jim Gavin's withdrawal dissipates, those Fianna Fáil voters will vote for Heather Humphreys. However, it's worth noting on last year's general election, perhaps the figures not quite so good. Terminal transfers, these are transfers where the party doesn't have a running mate in the contest, whilst 55% of Fine Gael's terminal transfers went to Fianna Fáil, just 32% of Fianna Fáil's terminal transfers went to Fine Gael, with 20% going to the Labour Party. So that might be of a concern. However, there has been a significant intervention within the past hour, and this has come from the Taoiseach Micheál Martin, who says he wouldn't be instructing his party how to vote, but did offer this view to Pascal Sheehy.
When you start trying to tell people how to vote, they generally go in the opposite direction. They don't like being directed, because people's right to vote is a very precious vote individually, and so on. So we won't be directing in any shape or form. When you select your own candidate, you obviously back your own candidate. But if you try and sort of say to people, I want you now to go to a candidate that may not have been your first choice or second choice, well, people, I just know from political experience, it doesn't work.
You know. For yourself?
Well, in terms of my own personal position, and it'll be a personal decision, I'm pro-European passionately, I'm pro the European Union. I'm pro the enterprise economy, as I'm here today, in terms of food and agriculture. And I think of the two candidates, the person that is closest to those perspectives, it's quite clear who that is,
Catherine Connolly?
No, obviously not. Not at all. Yeah. Heather, obviously.
Oh, that is very interesting. What about Fianna Fáil then, Barry? How's the party reflecting ahead of the weekend?
Well, some news just to hand, Sarah. The Irish Times is reporting that Jim Gavin has repaid the former tenant the unpaid €3,300 debt in relation to the overpaid rent. You'll recall I reported earlier this week that money would be repaid, subject to two clarifications, but the Irish Times reporting that within the past few moments that the money has been paid, quoting a source close to Jim Gavin, repaid in full without any conditions. The tenant incident in question, the Sunday World journalist Niall Donald declining to comment. But Micheál Martin will look to put a torrid week behind him, but he must face his party members and grassroots at the party's major fundraising dinner tomorrow night in Dublin, the Corja Fall dinner. But some party members still very unhappy indeed. We've heard quite a few literary references this week from Fianna Fáil, but one party member in Clare, speaking to the Clare Echo, the former chair of the party branch there, said, like the story where the little boy called out the Emperor for wearing no clothes, I'm encouraging our other 47 TDs to open their eyes and do the right thing by the membership of the party. The leader's position has become untenable. If he won't stand down, then push him aside. So that's what one member thinks, but the majority of the parliamentary party now circling around the Taoiseach Micheál Martin and the Deputy Leader Jack Chambers as they seek to move on from events of the past week.
OK, well, never a dull moment in what was supposed to be a dull campaign. Barry Lenihan, thank you very much.
Now, we know that there are thousands of people in the iPass system, but consider the plight of separated children seeking international protection. That's a whole other set of needs and requirements in terms of government support. The care system offers some safeguards, but according to a report today, not enough. Wayne Stanley is CEO of EPIC, Empowering People in Care, and he's with me now on the line. Wayne, you're very welcome. What are the main issues facing the people you represent?
So what the report today shows is that we have these children coming to Ireland. They are leaving their home country for a variety of reasons. Often those reasons and that separation can be quite traumatic. They're then travelling across a number of countries to get to Ireland. And in the course of that travel, they will see traumatic things, they will have traumatic experiences, and then they arrive in a new country and have to navigate a system of care and a system where they're trying to regularise their status. And within that, there's a level of pressure that will see trauma. So we're seeing trauma upon trauma. And these young people in the system, what they show is enormous resilience. What they show is, really working hard to try and organise their situation, regularise their situation.
You'd imagine so. I mean, arriving here separated, seeking asylum. What kind of numbers are we talking about, these children?
So there's currently just under 500 children in the system.
Okay.
So we're not talking about massive numbers, but that is a very significant increase up from, there would have been about 60 children just a few short years ago.
Okay.
So we have seen a very significant increase in the number of children coming and the number of resources that we need to apply to them.
And
what
Wayne,
the report is showing... Yeah.
Go on, sorry, excuse me.
What the report is showing is that in order to meet that need, the state has become more reliant on supported emergency accommodation to accommodate these children. And one of the issues there is those are less regulated. The staff in them are not necessarily of the same standard as would be in the Tuathail's own regulated system. And building relationships is difficult. These children are arriving, some of them are arriving post-17. And one of the things that EPIC is seeing for these young people is when they're leaving the care system, they may have gotten their status, but they're not entitled to an aftercare payment or aftercare support. And that means that they're going to end up, or they're very likely to end up in homelessness.
Okay.
Having suffered all that multiple trauma, they're now. So one of the things that we need to see that comes out of this report is we need a regulatory system, a legal system that understands the particular pressures that are on these children. And that is a requirement. So we're going to have to see the Department of Children, we're going to have to see the Department of Justice, Department of Education, all develop a model of care for these young people.
Under the auspices of whom or what agency?
Well, TUSLA provides care, but actually once they age out of the system, it's actually we need all of the arms of the state to come and do their part of it. We need housing to do their part. We need to be able to provide some level of accommodation that isn't homeless accommodation to these young people.
There's a huge amount of need in terms of children who need help from the state at the moment, obviously. But the numbers we're talking about here, as you mentioned, about 500 or so, it's not huge. So is this just putting the strategy, a coherent strategy in place, really?
Yeah, I mean, one of the things at our launch today, there was a number of stakeholders at the launch, and I have to say, there's a lot of commitment to these young people. There's a lot of, a real recognition that we need to do more and do better, and we hope to harness that and see that harnessed by the departments to go forward in that space.
Okay.
But it will require a very concerted effort. It will require legislative change. There's the Childcare 1991 Act. A new draft of that will come forward soon, and it needs to recognise that there is a difference when it comes to separated children and the way that the care system addresses.
Well, the needs are
children.
extreme and urgent, as you say. Wayne Stanley, CEO of EPIC, Empowering People in Care. Thank you very much indeed for joining us.
The Italian under-21 football team has been taking an unusual approach to training this week, with their players wearing an eye patch over one eye during practice matches. It's not unheard of in sport, though. World Cup winning rugby teams, top golfers and even Formula 1 drivers have been known to train in the same way. So we're joined on the line now by Ian McInerney, who you will know as the Irish-Italian rugby player who represented Italy internationally. And Ian, you're very welcome. Many listeners, as I mentioned, will know that you played at the highest level with eyesight actually in only one eye. So have you seen this kind of training before?
Hi Sarah, good to talk to you. Yeah, I think the first time I sort of came across maybe the eye patch method, which the Italian under-21 football team are doing, would have been about a little over 10 years ago. And for anyone that does follow rugby, the Richie McCaw, who's a really world famous double World Cup winning captain, he was wearing an eye patch in amongst all of his teammates as a training method. And it sort of brings up the question, what purpose can it do, and what extra percentage or benefit can it kind of give to the team? So it's an interesting concept, it's an interesting dynamic, and it's certainly one. I without putting a patch over my eye, I was playing obviously like them.
Yeah. So I suppose you have the same experience. So, but did you feel then that when you lost sight in one eye, it improved or affected how you used your other eye in terms of depth or perception or sharpness or any of that?
Yeah, well, if I'm to think maybe along the lines of the coaches in implementing this, I think they maybe want to get players maybe to look at the game slightly differently, excuse the pun, and maybe think about the game differently. Yeah, and maybe it might break up the monotony of training sometimes, maybe to throw in a different element into it, and just get people thinking creatively about the game and maybe how they might have to use other senses or might use their other eye to focus specifically on what they're doing.
But could I ask you this, Ian? Especially in rugby, are you not at a disadvantage? So I'm closing my left eye right now and I'm pretending I have a rugby ball. I'm really susceptible to a tackle from my left, haven't I? Because I can't see peripherally.
Yeah. Well, I suppose, like anything, if it's a team sport, you rely an awful lot on your teammates. If it's an individual sport, obviously a huge amount of dedication and training. But yeah, there are certain blind spots to that. But again, it's probably trying to think outside the bubble of that. How can you try and maybe turn that negative into a positive? To give you an example, I'd be part of a visually impaired touch rugby team, which is based in Dublin, and we've got people from all 4 provinces playing, and based on our eyesight is where and the confidence of the player is where they're positioned. So it's sort of amazing to think that if you're blind in your left eye, you're maybe better positioned on the left wing, exactly the same on the right. If you've got tunnel vision, maybe it's a little bit better been in the middle. So it's trying to, maybe actually use your strengths to the benefit of the team, and again, thinking differently and outside the box.
Okay, a texter says it brings a whole new meaning to blindside flanker.
I tell you, I've heard all the jokes before.
Sure,
yes, absolutely.
It's interesting. There's the article about this story in The Atlantic also mentions the England women's goalkeeper Hannah Hampton. She has a condition which means actually she has no depth perception, and she's a goalkeeper. And she says she doesn't know why, but it's never been a problem.
Yeah, it's sort of crazy to think. I think she was born with this particular problem. So, I mean, I don't want to speak on her behalf, but maybe if you're born with it, maybe it might be a little bit easier to deal with it as it is. Maybe you've had a few years to adapt, but crazy to think you're a goalkeeper, and obviously that specific role with the depth perception, you need every you need every end to judge across or whatever. So, but listen, it's inspirational as well that she's able to go on and play that position, and I'm sure she doesn't see it as a setback, but something to train harder for.
Yeah, it certainly is. Ian, thank you so much. Really interesting. Thank you for joining us. That's Ian McInerney, as I mentioned, Irish-Italian rugby player.
Now Liz Walsh is at Medhaven.
Thanks, Cormac, and good evening. Well, we've got high pressure centred just off the south coast of Cork this evening. That high pressure is going to stick around through this weekend and well into next week, with largely dry and benign conditions persisting, with very little change in weather conditions for the foreseeable. The unfortunate aspect is that there's quite a lot of moisture trapped underneath this high, and that's producing rather cloudy or gloomy conditions with little or no wind to mix it out. In the short term, we're going to maintain rather large amounts of cloud, but over the weekend, as the high becomes more generally centred over Ireland, we may get some clearer, sunnier breaks coming through, fingers crossed. Where clear breaks do occur, that brings the risk of mist and fog formation at night and in the early morning, so that's just something to watch out for if you're out and about early doors. In short, we're looking at mostly cloudy conditions this evening and tonight, with limited clear breaks, mainly in the east and south, lows of 4 to 9 degrees in light westerly breezes, and then any mist and fog will clear tomorrow morning, leaving a dry day with perhaps a little more in the way of hazy sunshine breaking through the wall of cloud. Highs of 11 to 15 degrees in light winds, and Sunday will be a similar day, but perhaps with a little more in the way of mist and fog around on Sunday morning for a time. That's the forecast. Good evening.
If you're heading to Spain this weekend, you might want to take a look at the weather forecast before you set off on your travels, because Spain's weather service has issued a red alert for heavy rain and flooding along the country's Costa Blanca. Storm Alice is set to bring very heavy rain to popular tourist areas around Alicante and around that area. I'm joined by freelance Spanish journalist Graham Keeley now for more. Graham, you're very welcome. What's the weather like there now, actually?
Okay, well, the authorities have still issued red alerts for the areas you've just mentioned. That is areas of Alicante and further down in Murcia. And so we're looking at heavy rains, where I've just been looking at television pictures of torrential rain running through the centre of towns like Santa Pola. Cars absolutely flooded when rivers have overrun, high winds, and some flights have been either diverted or cancelled to Alicante.
Okay, my goodness, so it started already. How long will it continue for, and is it likely to get worse?
Well, the weather authorities are saying these red alerts apply to these two areas until tomorrow morning at least. So they also predict that there should be heavy rain in the region until Sunday.
Okay. You mentioned Alicante and Murcia and Santa Pola, I think you said. Anywhere else where that'd be popular with Irish holidaymakers?
Yes, one area which has been particularly badly hit is Cartagena. Cartagena will be it's part of Murcia, but it's popular with golfers. And there's a campsite there called Villas Caravaning. 100 people have been evacuated from there. And the Red Cross are setting up centres in readiness in case more people have to be evacuated from the area.
Goodness me. I wonder, my mind goes back to the floods in Valencia last year, Graham. Is it set to be like that in any way?
Well, Valencia is obviously very close. With red alerts issued, it could be as bad as that, but they hope at least that it won't hit the same areas. And obviously, hopefully this time they'll be more ready for anything that may happen.
I was just going to ask you, is that readiness apparent at this point.
It is, because they've issued these red alerts way before this was expected. Earlier this week and earlier this month, there were alerts in places like Ibiza. People were sent messages on their phone in good time. So it may be that the authorities around the country don't want to make the same mistakes as happened in Valencia.
Yeah, you'd imagine so. All right, that the lessons will be learned from last year, and hopefully there won't be as much damage done. Look, thank you very much indeed for the update. So there's a warning for people if you're heading to Spain. That's all we have time for today. The programme produced by Brian Lally. Our broadcast coordinator was Amandine Passo Devine. Mark McGrath was on sound. Up next is Callan's Kicks. When you're falls, Slonagus Bannacht.
Drive Time on RTÉ Radio 1.